Hello everybody, and welcome back to another absolutely insane story that honestly sounds too wild to be true. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious operations ever conceived during the Cold War. A plan so outrageous that even Hollywood would have said it was too far-fetched. We're talking about America's attempt to literally steal an entire Soviet submarine from the bottom of the ocean, using what can only be described as the world's most expensive claw machine. You're going to want to stick around for this story. It involves billionaire eccentrics, elaborate cover stories, and engineering feats that pushed the boundaries of what anyone thought was humanly possible. Picture this. It's the height of the Cold War. Tensions between America and the Soviet Union are at breaking point, and both superpowers are locked in this deadly game of espionage and one-upmanship. Nuclear submarines are prowling the depths of the world's oceans, carrying enough firepower to end civilization as we know it. These vessels represent the cutting edge of military technology, packed with secrets that each side would kill to get their hands on. Then something extraordinary happens. A Soviet nuclear submarine carrying ballistic missiles and a treasure trove of classified technology mysteriously vanishes in the Pacific Ocean. The Soviets launch a massive search operation, but come up empty-handed. They eventually give up, assuming their submarine and all its secrets are lost forever in the crushing depths of the ocean. But here's where things get really interesting. The Americans not only know exactly where this submarine is, they've got detailed photographs of it sitting on the ocean floor, nearly 3 miles down. And someone in Washington decides they're going to go down there and take it. Now you might be thinking, surely that's impossible, right? I mean, we're talking about retrieving a massive nuclear submarine from depths that would crush a human being instantly, using technology that barely existed at the time. The pressure down there is over 500 times greater than at sea level. It's a hostile alien environment where the smallest mistake means death. But apparently impossible wasn't in America's vocabulary during the 1970s because they decided to build the most elaborate heist operation in human history. This wasn't just about grabbing some enemy hardware. This submarine potentially contained nuclear warheads, advanced sonar systems, encryption equipment, and classified documents that could give the United States an enormous intelligence advantage in the Cold War. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they succeeded, America would gain unprecedented insights into Soviet nuclear capabilities and submarine technology. But if they got caught, it could trigger a major international incident or even push the world toward nuclear war. Either way, it was going to cost an absolute fortune. So how do you secretly build a ship capable of reaching down 3 miles into the ocean and lifting a 2,000-ton submarine without anyone noticing? Well, you don't. Instead, you create the most elaborate cover story ever devised and hope nobody asks too many questions. This is where one of America's most famous and eccentric billionaires enters our story. A man so reclusive and paranoid that he rarely left his hotel suite, but whose name was synonymous with outrageous engineering projects and impossible dreams. The perfect frontman for an operation that needed to hide in plain sight. The plan they came up with was absolutely brilliant in its audacity. They would build what appeared to be a state-of-the-art deep-sea mining vessel, complete with all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a legitimate commercial operation. To the outside world, this ship would be searching for valuable minerals on the ocean floor. A perfectly reasonable, if ambitious, business venture. But hidden within this innocuous mining ship would be the most sophisticated submarine recovery system ever conceived. A mechanical grabbing device so advanced that it made the robotic arms on space shuttles look like children's toys. This thing would have to reach down through nearly 3 miles of crushing ocean, locate a submarine in the pitch-black depths, grab hold of it without falling apart, and then slowly winch the entire thing back to the surface. The engineering challenges were mind-boggling. The cable system alone had to be strong enough to lift thousands of tons, while flexible enough to handle the ocean currents and the constant motion of the ship above. The grabbing mechanism had to work flawlessly on the first attempt because there wouldn't be a second chance. And all of this had to be accomplished while maintaining the fiction that they were just mining for rocks. But perhaps the most incredible part of this whole operation was the sheer scale of the deception required to pull it off. This wasn't just about fooling casual observers or even foreign intelligence agencies. They had to create an entire fake company, complete with legitimate business plans, scientific research, and media coverage. They needed to make the world believe that deep-sea mining was not only possible, but profitable enough to justify the enormous costs involved. The cover story had to be so convincing that even when Soviet ships came to investigate this mysterious vessel, the crew could maintain their charade without breaking character. Imagine the pressure of knowing that one slip-up, one inconsistent detail, could expose an operation that had taken years to plan and hundreds of millions of dollars to execute. And we haven't even gotten to the best part yet, because once they actually found this submarine and started the recovery process, things got even more complicated. The ocean floor is not a forgiving place, and mechanical systems that work perfectly in laboratory conditions have a nasty habit of failing when subjected to the crushing pressures and corrosive environment of the deep sea. What happened next would test the limits of human engineering and determinations in ways that nobody could have anticipated. The recovery operation would take weeks of painstaking work, with every moment bringing the risk of discovery or catastrophic mechanical failure. And when things finally did go wrong, they went wrong in spectacular fashion. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Before we dive into the heart-stopping details of the actual heist, we need to understand how this whole incredible operation came together in the first place. The whole thing started with a sound. Not just any sound, but a very specific acoustic signature picked up by America's underwater listening network in March 1968. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, sensitive hydrophones detected what intelligence analysts described as a low-frequency implosion event. To you and me, that might not sound like much, but to the people monitoring Soviet submarine activity, it was like finding a needle in a haystack. While the Soviets were frantically searching thousands of square miles of ocean for their missing submarine, American analysts were quietly triangulating the exact location of that mysterious sound. Using data from multiple listening posts, they pinpointed the source to a spot roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. The Soviets had been looking in completely the wrong area. This is where the USS Halibut comes into our story. Originally designed as a nuclear attack submarine, the Halibut had been converted into something far more interesting. She was now essentially a deep-sea spy ship, equipped with the most advanced underwater cameras and robotic systems that 1960s technology could produce. Her mission was simple in concept, but incredibly dangerous in execution. Find that submarine and photograph everything. For 3 weeks, the Halibut methodically searched the ocean floor using remotely operated cameras. The work was painstaking and nerve-wracking. They were operating in Soviet-patrolled waters, using experimental equipment at depths that pushed the limits of what was technically possible. One mechanical failure, one detection by a Soviet patrol, and the whole mission would be blown. But then they found it. Lying broken on the seafloor nearly 3 miles down was a Soviet Gulf-class ballistic missile submarine. The photographs they brought back were absolutely extraordinary. Here was an intact enemy nuclear submarine, complete with its missile compartments, sonar systems, and potentially even its code books and nuclear warheads. It was an intelligence goldmine just sitting there waiting to be claimed. When those photographs reached Washington, they caused an absolute sensation. Defense Secretary Melvin Laird and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger immediately grasped the implications. This wasn't just about understanding Soviet submarine technology. This was about gaining access to their most closely guarded nuclear secrets, their encryption systems, their sonar capabilities. It was the intelligence coup of the century, if they could figure out how to pull it off. The problem was that retrieving anything from that depth was considered impossible by virtually every marine engineer on the planet. The pressure alone would crush conventional salvage equipment like an empty soda can. The submarine weighed over 2,000 tons and was sitting in an environment so hostile that even reaching it would require technological breakthroughs that didn't yet exist. But President Nixon approved the operation anyway. The potential intelligence value was simply too enormous to ignore, even if the chances of success seemed impossibly small. The CIA was put in charge of what would become known as Project Azorian, and they were given essentially unlimited resources to make the impossible happen. This is where our eccentric billionaire makes his entrance. Howard Hughes was already famous for pushing the boundaries of engineering and aviation. He'd built the largest airplane ever constructed, revolutionized Hollywood filmmaking, and accumulated a fortune through a combination of genius and sheer audacity. More importantly for the CIA's purposes, he had a reputation for embarking on seemingly impossible projects that somehow succeeded against all odds. Hughes agreed to lend his name and credibility to what would become the most elaborate cover story in intelligence history. The plan was breathtakingly simple in its audacity. They would announce to the world that Hughes was entering the deep-sea mining business, searching for manganese nodules on the ocean floor. It was just plausible enough to be believable, especially coming from someone with Hughes's track record of ambitious ventures. The Hughes Glomar Explorer, as the ship came to be known, was built in plain sight at a shipyard in Pennsylvania. To outside observers, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be, a state-of-the-art mining vessel equipped with the latest deep-sea technology. The media covered its construction as a fascinating example of American ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit, but hidden within that innocent-looking hull was some of the most sophisticated engineering ever attempted. The centerpiece was a massive mechanical claw system that Lockheed had designed specifically for this mission. Officially called the capture vehicle, but nicknamed Clementine by the engineers who built it. This device was essentially a giant robotic hand capable of reaching down 3 miles and gently grasping a nuclear submarine. The technical challenges were absolutely staggering. The claw had to be lowered through nearly 3 miles of ocean using a pipe string system similar to what oil rigs use, except far more complex and operating at depths no oil rig had ever attempted. Each section of pipe had to be precisely machined and tested, because a single failure would mean losing the entire system. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering deception. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary, even boring. But hidden within its hull was a moon pool, essentially a flooded chamber where the recovered submarine could be brought up and examined away from prying eyes. The entire recovery operation would take place underwater, invisible to any Soviet surveillance vessels that might be watching. In July 1974, 6 years after the original submarine had been lost, the Hughes Glomar Explorer finally departed for the recovery site. The crew knew they were embarking on one of the most audacious missions in naval history, but they also knew that discovery would mean international incident, or worse. Sure enough, Soviet vessels did approach during the operation. When asked what they were doing, the American crew calmly explained they were conducting deep-sea mining tests. The Soviets, who still didn't know exactly where their submarine had sunk, had no reason to suspect anything unusual about a mining ship operating in international waters. The actual recovery operation took over a month of incredibly delicate work. Slowly, carefully, the massive claw descended through the crushing depths until it finally made contact with the submarine's hull. This was the moment of truth. Years of planning, hundreds of millions of dollars, and enormous political risks all came down to whether this mechanical system would work as designed. The claws successfully grabbed hold of the submarine and began the agonizingly slow process of lifting it toward the surface. For days, everything went perfectly. The impossible was actually happening. They were stealing an entire Soviet nuclear submarine from the bottom of the ocean. But then, disaster struck. As the submarine neared the surface, structural fatigue caused part of the claw system to fail catastrophically. 2/3 of the submarine broke away and crashed back to the ocean floor, taking most of its secrets with it. Only a small section made it aboard the Glomar Explorer, along with the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors who were given a respectful burial at sea. The operation had succeeded partially, but most of what they'd hoped to recover was lost forever. The CIA managed to keep the entire operation secret for another year, until investigative journalists finally broke the story. By then, the Cold War had moved on, and the Glomar Explorer had become a footnote in the secret history of superpower rivalry. Today, most of that Soviet submarine still lies on the Pacific Ocean floor, keeping its secrets in the crushing darkness 3 miles down. The Glomar Explorer was eventually scrapped, but it left behind something unexpected, a phrase that intelligence agencies still use today. When pressed for information about classified operations, officials now give what's known as the Glomar response. We can neither confirm nor deny. It's a fitting legacy for one of the most audacious heists ever attempted. A reminder that during the Cold War, the line between impossible and inevitable was often thinner than anyone imagined.